Light the beam, because it's time for Nerdy for 30, the podcast where we talk about nerdy-ish movies for 30-ish minutes. My name is Kevin Bauer, a.k.a. the Critic's Choice. With me, as always, the People's Champ, Tim Keck.
If you feel it, chase it, baby.
If you feel it, chase it. And today, we are talking about Ready to Rumble. This is a movie we've been talking with a friend of ours about covering for years now. The day is finally here. You may know him as an actor, a writer, a comedian. You can catch him bartending at the Second City in Williamsburg. It's Nick Pearl.
Yes, Nick.
Well, let's get ready to talk about Ready to Rumble.
Dude, Nick, we talked about this years ago at a bar. I had never heard of this movie in my entire life.
That's most of the time is how that goes. Yeah.
How did this? I know you're a wrestling fan. I'm assuming you saw this like when it came out, right? As a kid.
I did. Yeah. It came out in 2000. And I think I was about 8 years old. I did not see it in theaters, but it used to play all the time on TV on I think like TNT or something like that. And I caught it a number of times and eventually bought the DVD because I loved it so much. And I had not watched it in a number of years until rewatching it just earlier today for this. And I got to tell you, it still slaps. It is the most batshit insane fucking movie. It is, which is, I mean, I know we only have 30 minutes, but there is so much that I want to talk about with this movie and the wreckage that it brought to everyone involved. This movie, Ready to Rumble, famous for being a boxing catchphrase. It's catchphrase of Michael Buffer, who did legitimately work for WCW. That's where they got the title from. Even though he is, again, known for being a boxing announcer, not wrestling, but be that as it may, they decided to title the movie this. This movie not only was a critical and commercial failure, so it failed in every way that a movie could possibly fail by its own merit. It didn't even make half of its budget back, and I think it's hovering at around a 20-something% on Rotten Tomatoes.
23.
There, okay, 23. Sorry, I was underselling it. Not only that, WCW, the actual pro wrestling promotion, World Championship Wrestling, that this movie is essentially built to promote, would completely go out of business within a year after this movie comes out.
Incredible.
And it is often looked at as a major reason for the demise of the promotion. In reality, it was like the last domino in like a bunch of fucking terrible decisions that they had been making for the course of like 2 or 3 years at that point. But this movie and the like way that they promoted it within the wrestling product afterward directly led to the worst viewer numbers, Nielsen ratings, buy rates for pay-per-views, the worst possible metrics that you could judge a pro wrestling company's success by. So in more ways than even just from a cinematic perspective, this movie was a colossal failure. And I just love it. I love it, I think, not just for the film itself, which is hard to love, but all the things that happened around it and behind the scenes and things that happened afterward and all that. So I find this movie supremely fascinating for all those reasons.
I was shocked at how much I liked this movie. About halfway through, I had a great time watching this. I'll be honest. It's such a... I was trying to describe, figure out exactly the kind of fans they're targeting with this, right? Because it is...
Because they don't exist.
Well, it's like breaking kayfabe. So it's like we're going after smarks, but also... it's just about butt jokes and poop and stuff. And I'm like, what is this intersection where they're just like, oh yeah, this is actually, they take you behind the scenes, but also we're sucking dudes into porta potties. And some of the jokes in this are great, really effing killer jokes in this movie. I was shocked. I laughed out loud multiple times. I was in on this. I don't know. I feel like I haven't watched anything like this in a long time. And this hit a button. This hit a comedy button in my heart that hadn't been pressed in a while, and I felt like a kid again.
There's some primo slapstick in this movie.
Oh yeah, dude. You know what in a way, it feels kind of like a spiritual sibling to Joe Dirt. Like it feels like this could exist in the Dirtiverse, which is I'll just go in for the Dirtyverse. Let's just go right into it. But like in the same way that like for some reason like I haven't gone back to revisit it. I'm sure it's bad. I fucking love Joe Dirt. And all my boys love Joe Dirt. Like everybody I know fucking rides for Joe Dirt because they wouldn't stop playing it on Comedy Central for years. But like outside of this is such a profoundly strange movie. This is far from the worst thing we've covered on this podcast. It's one of the weirder entries, but it's like there is something really charming about it. And outside of the first 20 being completely disgusting, like there's so many just absolutely vile, disgusting things that happen in the first like 15-20 minutes. It has so much heart,
and that's outside of the ring, all outside of the wrestling ring.
That like it's so these dudes work cleaning porta potties. It's presented to us as though this is like the most understandable common job in the world, but the like
it's a porta potty that Scott Kahn's father left to him. They say that it is a sanitation truck that his dead father left to him, presumably in his will. I want to point that out. They don't work for the sanitation department.
No, they just
own a truck that sucks up shit. And then what do they do with it?
He didn't make an appearance. We can only imagine it was James Caan playing Scott Kahn's father in this movie. Maybe he was cut, but like
it was David Arquette's father playing Jimmy King's father, though.
Wait, are you shitting me?
Whoa.
I swear to God. Because I looked it up afterward. It was Louis Arquette, who would die less than a year later, who played Jimmy King's father, the one who's like, what are you, a freak? And the one, this is sad, but the woman who played his mother also would die within a year of the movie coming out too. Twilight Zone curse. I don't know, but
weird.
Yeah, but that anyway,
this movie
that
did
was
a lot
actually
of damage. A lot of damage
to a lot of people. That was actually David Arquette's father.
Oh my god!
Wow.
Fucking weird.
This movie's fucking bonkers from top to bottom, in and out. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean the scene where they're sitting on the back of it and there's just poop dripping out of the back of the. I apologize for anyone listening to this eating for this part of it. They're sitting there and there's just like a leak in the porta potty truck between them that is never addressed
while they're eating.
Yeah,
while they're eating burgers, there is a constant trickle of feces in between them. And that's a metaphor for this whole movie, I want to say. Every time something good happens, there's a trickle of fucking dog shit that happens in between. And Tim, like what you were saying, this movie doesn't know if what its opinion on kayfabe is at all.
Yes.
Kayfabe, for people listening in case you don't know, very specific pro wrestling jargon is the story that all pro wrestlers, promoters, referees, announcers, commentators, it's the story they all buy in on, and as fans you buy in on as well. As a fan, as at least as an adult fan, that it's scripted. It's not, you're not watching a real wrestling show, you're watching a fictionalized television or pay-per-view product that is about wrestling promotion. But in this movie, they at the very beginning, it's like they're talking to each other about, all right, what's the finish for the match? Jimmy King's not here. All right, well, you're going to do this. He's going to hit his finish on you. And 1, 2, 3, that's it. Okay, great. Actually, Dallas, let me talk to you for a minute. Tonight's the night. Tonight, you're going to just fucking punch him in the face, commit assault in the middle of the ring, and everyone's going to be cool with it. Trust me, bro. Because this shit is real. Now it's real. You thought it was fake. Now it's real, though. But then we're still going to do fake wrestling moves in the real fight.
Yes, that's the craziest part to me is they're like, we're fighting for real. And then they do some of the fakest looking wrestling moves, like that one where you grab the ankles and like rock back. Yeah, the slingshot is one of the goofiest looking wrestling moves there are. It's incredible, really fun. But to be like, we're fighting for real now, and then you hit them with a devastating slingshot is so silly. It's
or Jimmy
so
King's
goofy.
finishing move, which is they call him the crowning, and it's a double axe handle smash from the top where you just clasp your hands together, fingers laced, so you'll definitely break your fingers, and hit the top of their head, otherwise known as the hardest bone in the body, with your interlaced fingers. And this is supposed to be happening in a real fight, and it really knocks out DDP because now the fight is real. Because they've established that because Joe Pantoliano says so.
The idea that they're now fighting for real, and one of the guys starts climbing to the top rope is so insane. So insane. Like, the wrestling ring is like ropes around it and these corner posts, and completely impractical in a real fight, but it allows them to like jump off of them and do flips. And I mean, it contributes to the theater of the whole thing. But you're right. When that's when how many they don't know what it is.
How many real fights have you been in where there were ropes though? I mean, you have no way of knowing if it is realistic or not.
Even like the octagon, like they don't ever use the octagon, you know?
Yeah.
Like UFC fighters don't use the cage. I guess boxing, like put people against the ropes, but you've never seen a boxer like run to the side, do like a moonsault off one of the ropes and then like punch somebody while they're flying through the air. Like, it just doesn't make sense in real life. It's what makes wrestling amazing. But to do that during a real fight, what is happening the whole time? I'm so confused.
It made the final fight with DDP and Jimmy the King so weird because like there have been multiple times, like, you know, like the mat in wrestling, it's like trampoline-ish. Like there's some give to it so that people don't get hurt severely. When DDP falls off of the top of the cage and hits the floor, it looks hard. Like it looks like he'd be dead. There is no.
If that really happened, he would be dead.
Absolutely.
There's no. Yeah, and something incredibly fucked up about that in particular is that. Presumably, this movie came out in May 2000. Presumably, it was filming in 1999, right? And they have that scene at the very end. Diamond Dallas Page falls from the top of this triple-decker, incredibly impractical cage that was never actually used in any professional wrestling match ever until after this movie. They actually did it for real in real life after this. So it was a thing that this movie was not written by anyone who actually knew anything about wrestling. I just want to point that out. It was written by an asshole who's friends with Harvey Weinstein and fucked up the Fanboys movie in 2008. There's a whole thing about him. He's a piece of shit. Anyway, the point is, in September 1999, there was a really tragic event that happened in the WWF in the rival promotion at Over the Edge 1999 is the name of a pay-per-view at the Kemper Arena, where Owen Hart tragically fell to his death in reality from the top of the arena, and he landed in the ring. And that's how he died, from the top of the arena. How does this movie end? A guy falling from the top of a very, very tall, close to the ceiling of the arena cage, and lands on his back. Now, obviously, this was all made before that happened, but just really bad timing. Really bad. Like, I mean, could have. I mean, at that point, you have no idea where in like post-production they are with the movie, but it's like, you gotta imagine that came up at some point. You know, like, is this in poor taste? You know, an actual, a beloved wrestler died in a manner, you know, not too dissimilar from this. It was during a pay-per-view. It was fortunately not actually during a match. It was an accident that happened in between matches, so it wasn't caught on camera or anything. But, you know, eerily similar in a lot of really unfortunate ways. Just another fucking bad luck thing associated with this movie.
Especially with Diamond Dallas being all bloody and like the way he lands, it's not even like, you know, it's not like Mankind landing. It's like he's dead or something. It's rough.
Yeah.
To be a little funnier about the cage. Does the cage make any sense at all? Because to paint a picture for the audience, there's a giant cage. It's a square cage that they put over the ring, right? This is standard Hell in a Cell. There's cages in professional wrestling. I feel like we've seen it. And so this cage comes down and it's got another cage, a slightly smaller cage on top of it, a medium cage, and then a smaller cage on top of that cage. Now, usually to get to the top of a cage in a cage match, you somehow get outside the cage, right? And climb up the top. But for this one, in order to get into the middle cage, you have to get on a ladder and you climb up and then you're in the middle cage. And then to get into the top cage, you have to climb up the middle and now you're in the top cage. But it really just cuts from him being inside the middle cage to him on the outside of the whole structure, climbing to the top. And there's no doors. There's no way out of there. There's just, the structure itself doesn't make any sense from that. I mean, just physically, the character is just in a place and then he is no longer there. I don't understand it. I don't even know how this would work in real life.
The entire movie is Looney Tunes logic from top to bottom. Nothing makes sense. Everything is just cartoon logic. And what's interesting about that is that I feel like there's only two different ways that pro wrestling is ever depicted in film. It's either the Ready to Rumble or No Holds Barred, or even like the scene, the one scene in Rocky 3, or the one scene in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie with Macho Man or Bonesaw McGraw, where it's super ridiculous, cartoon, over the top, insane nonsense, because pro wrestling is already a parody of wrestling itself on the surface level. So to make it a comedy about it, you have to parody a parody. And so you have to make it incredibly insane shit that can't physically possibly happening. Fucking David Arquette's character drives a motorcycle off a ramp through the cage, lands with the motorcycle in the cage, skids the motorcycle, knocks one person out of a group of like 30 out of the ring, doesn't kill anyone, and stands up unharmed. That's too crazy for an actual pro wrestling match. Sure. That's the one kind of way that pro wrestling is depicted in film. And I love it. I'm not saying that I have any problem with it whatsoever. The other way it's depicted is incredibly tragic, heartbreaking, soul-shattering misery, with the wrestler either fictionalized but kind of inspired by true stories, like The Wrestler, made by Aronofsky, which I feel like The Wrestler is a gritty reboot of Ready to Rumble in a lot of ways. With Randy the Ram Robinson being the gritty real version of Jimmy King in his trailer park washed up, and The Iron Claw, which came out recently, which of course is a devastating film about loss and is incredibly good, and I cried very much.
That movie,
but that's it.
Oh my God, Iron Claw really, like, not that The Wrestler wasn't dramatic, but yeah, Iron Claw absolutely ruined me.
I still haven't seen it.
It's very sad.
Yeah,
it's so sad they had tragic. They had to leave one of the dead brothers out. It was so sad. They couldn't include all of them.
Oh God, it's a rough one, man. But it's so funny because, like, in a weird way, I feel like it totally works the way they depict it. It reminds me of how I felt about wrestling as a kid, because my biggest relationship is, like, I had one friend who was really into wrestling, and every time we would go over to his house, he had like VHS tapes of old pay-per-views that we would put on, and everybody would like play wrestle each other in the living room. And then we also just played a shitload of WCW NWO Revenge. And like, it's classic. Still the greatest N64 game that's ever been created. And it like filled me with joy to see a couple of those dudes in this movie. But like having the motorcycle come in, and then Arquette gets off, and now he's in a full wrestling character, even though we kind of barely touched on the fact that this would be payoff for him. He's in a full wrestling character. He's assumed his family mantle in a way, and he is the law. I was so fucking in on that. Like, it worked so well for me.
I liked it.
And his dad is finally proud of him now.
I know. It's so good. But yeah, you're right. Like, in the middle of that, in the middle of all the play stuff they're doing, Rose McGowan gets hit with a real ladder.
Yeah, she gets smacked right in the face with a ladder. It's played for laughs like a cartoon. Not the first time she is hit in the face for laughs in this movie. The first time is during a sex scene.
Yeah. Appears to be what she's into. It seems very consensual while it's going on.
It is consensual, yes. It's consensual. because the writer says so. Yeah, but that movie is definitely what introduced very young Nick to Rose McGowan, and if for nothing else, I really do appreciate it for that. But you guys, are you guys aware of? Are you guys aware of what happened? What David Arquette became, like what he did after this movie in terms of wrestling?
You told me about it at the bar when we were talking about this movie in the first place, because correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't want to step on anything, but didn't they let him get the fucking belt?
More like forced him. Yeah, he David Arquette is, and there's a really great documentary called "You Cannot Kill David Arquette" that came out only like a couple years ago, and it follows, David Arquette training in, I don't know, like 2019 or so, like recently, to be a pro wrestler in real life and doing like some death matches and stuff. And it was him
like hardcore, right?
Yeah. Awesome. And he almost dies in one of them. It's really messed up. But he talks about in that movie and in numerous interviews over the years, otherwise, that like he is a lifelong pro wrestling fan. He absolutely was thrilled at the opportunity to do this movie. And when presumably Vince Russo, who was the head of creative at WCW at the time and an on-screen character, because, why not, I guess, it was his idea to put the belt on David Arquette, the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, a title that, yes, while in essence being a prop for a fictional show, is still this belt that has been carried by guys who dedicated their entire lives to the craft, to the art form, quote unquote, of professional wrestling. Guys like Ric Flair, Big Van Vader, Dusty Rhodes, Harley Race, guys that, carry a lot of weight and respect amongst fans, and also, of course, amongst other wrestlers. Now, David Arquette knew all this because he's a big wrestling fan. And he was like, everyone's going to hate this. He was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be the WCW champion. I don't deserve to be the WCW champion. I'm David Arquette. I'm not a wrestler. This is a bad idea. Everyone's going to hate this. And they told him, we're not going to promote your movie unless you do it.
Oh, my God.
We, WCW, who this movie is entirely for and about, this is just another example of WCW completely shooting themselves in the foot over the last few years of their existence, and another of the many reasons why they went out of business. But yeah, they were like, we're not going to promote the movie unless you do it. So you got to do it. Sorry, pal. And so he did it. And sure enough, everyone fucking hated it. It was a terrible idea. And it led to I think the lowest buy rate in WCW's entire history for a pay-per-view. It got a 0.2, which is like more people would watch a weekly episode of like Law and Order or something than like a rerun of Law and Order than bought into this pay-per-view that also was at an arena that seats like, I don't know, 20, 30,000 people, and they only sold like 2,000 tickets maybe. But they did the triple decker cage match. And it was bad. It was really bad. And they did throw a wrestler off the top of it, but he did not land in the ring. He landed on a part of the entrance ramp that they had set up, like a crash pad kind of thing, I believe. And it was Chris Kanyon. It was a completely separate, unrelated guy anyway, because WCW is fucking stupid at this point. And David Arquette would hold the world title for like less than a month, I think, and then drop it to someone else who was already like the 12th person to hold it by like April of that year. No, of like June of that year. So they were in a free fall at this point. And David Arquette does talk a lot about how he lost a lot of respect in Hollywood, and it really affected his movie career, which then of course affected his mental health and his personal life, and he would get divorced and blah, blah, blah. And like, not to blah, blah, blah over like this, these hard things.
Blah, blah, blah. We all know sad shit.
His family died in a plane crash, yada, yada. No. So this movie really did affect him personally a lot too. But in a positive note, he donated all of the money that he made from his time working as a wrestler, quote unquote, in WCW and as WCW champion. He donated all of that money to the families of a number of wrestlers who had passed away, like Brian Pillman or like Owen Hart. He donated a portion of his money to them and didn't keep any of it for himself. So I thought wanted to mention that he's a good guy by all accounts, seems like, and a massive wrestling fan, and should not shoulder any of the blame for him being the champion when he explicitly said that he didn't want to be and it would be a terrible idea, and they basically forced him to be. And yeah.
A tough one. I mean, I will say, on Rotten Tomatoes, it's like a 23 critics, but like a 52 fans. There's people who like this movie. It's got some great lines in it. Like, why does it look like you have a finger in your butt? Because I do.
Because I do. A diamond upside down is a pussy.
Yeah, you have trouble. One of his dad's like, you have trouble wrestling your pee-pee out. And he's like, it's not that. It's just I don't see the point. Yeah. And I'm like, that's so funny. This guy's just pissing his pants all the time. He doesn't see the point of, like, I don't know. Also, he refers to he demands to see the bare butt buffet for the red eye special. Great lines. I mean, this is awesome. I don't know if I necessarily love David Arquette, as just there's something about him that I'm like, I feel like I'm never fully in on David Arquette, but he's at his most likable in this movie. I feel like he's chill. He's fun. It seems like he's a good guy in real life. Like, maybe I'm giving him a bad shake, but him and Scott Caan, I thought, were both very, very chill and likable in this movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. They both seem like they're having a blast. It's fun to watch them. I do love David Arquette. I'll say that. I fucking love that guy. He seems like a great guy. And in the credits of this movie, when you see the outtakes, it's fun to watch him having fun, because he seems like one of those dudes who's succeeding in Hollywood because he's a great hang. He's not necessarily like, is he going to headline an Oscar movie? Probably not. Am I happy every time I see him show up somewhere? Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, people said that about Brendan Fraser too. Now look at him. So
very good point.
You never know.
Very, very good point. Dude, there's
also,
so much.
Yes, David Arquette is destined for a Brendan Fraser resurgence. That's 100%. Nick Pearl said it here on the pod.
He's called a shot.
First, folks.
There's so much left to talk about in this one.
I know. I want to I want to give a shout out to the turn by Oliver Platt in this film as well.
Jesus Christ.
Fantastic Southern man portrayal by Oliver Platt. Fucking Uncle whatever his name is from The Bear, as supposed to be believed as an undefeated WCW heavyweight pro wrestling champion, the likes of which we haven't seen since Goldberg or fucking, I don't know, Bruno Sammartino or some shit. This guy, this clearly already middle-aged, not in shape character actor from Frost Nixon is the guy. He's the guy, and he's like, I love Oliver Platt. He gives it his all in this movie. So does Caroline Reyes, his trailer trash, wife or whatever. But like, man, they couldn't have picked someone that looked at all like a wrestler, maybe.
No, dude.
You can tell he's in great shape because he wrestles in like full clothing.
Yeah.
That's how you know. That's where you get the best athletes. Like, oh man, there's no skin showing.
I'm fairly certain his stunt double had to like pad his stomach to make him look bigger. And his stunt double was a pro wrestler.
Oh my God.
He's an actual wrestler. Yeah.
Dude, when I saw him play the restaurant critic and chef, I was like, we got to get this guy in a squared circle. He's got it. It was inexplicable. Like, yeah, my jaw hit the floor when I saw who was playing Jimmy the King. And it's like why in the world didn't they get one of the American Gladiators guys or something? Like, I understand that you can't really use a real wrestler for this, but why in the fuck did they go with Oliver Platt?
I'm also like, why can't you just use a real wrestler? Like, it's not, again, they're not aiming for the Oscars here. Just pick a wrestler that's already popular, do a story where it turns real and he gets shit. That happened in real life with Bret Hart. I mean, and he worked for WCW. It could have been way more meta and realistic. Not that they ever would have done that, but still. And the fact that they got it is kind of funny to think about, because these guys and the women and the men in WCW are athletes, yes, but they're also actors to an extent. It is a very extremely physical form of acting, but they are acting, the anguish and pain when they're in like the ankle lock or whatever, or just cutting promos or, giving passionate speeches and, whatever. You got to imagine it was a little bit of a like, oh, all right. So none of us are good enough. Okay. Or like any of the Nitro girls. I love Rose McGowan, but like all the Nitro girls are like, oh, all right. So she's got it. We're just going to bring her in. Cool. We'll just do our job like normal in the background, I guess.
I wanted to get your opinion on whether or not we saw the best of what WCW has to offer, right? Because like Diamond Dallas Page is the big bad in this, I guess. And then Goldberg's in it as like a friend. Sting's there, doesn't say anything, just shows up to have the King's back for some reason.
to be Batman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this really like you're tuning into a WCW pay-per-view at the time? Are these the top guys? Is this the show?
No. No, not even. It's so that's another thing that I'm glad you brought up, actually, because first of all, them casting Diamond Dallas Page as the main villain in this movie is so ass backwards. If you were at all an actual WCW fan, another reason why this movie is literally made for no one, because there's so much. Like if you're a WCW fan and you go in and watch this, you're like, well, who the fuck the evil boss guy is Eric Bischoff. Who the fuck is Titus Sinclair? What is? And it's because Eric Bischoff was fired right before they were supposed to start filming. But you look at Diamond Dallas Page, who is for years one of the biggest baby faces in WCW. For years at that point, he was the first guy to actually start calling himself the People's Champ before The Rock did. He was incredibly popular with fans, and to have him be the bad guy when they would do storylines on TV, like after the film came out, he was the good guy in the storyline, being like, hey, check out my movie where I play a bad guy. Can you believe it? Because I'm such a good guy. And it's like, why would you do that in the first place? Why wouldn't you have a bad guy play the bad guy and then have the bad guy be the bad guy on TV and promote the movie as or have Diamond Dallas Page in it because he's so charismatic and not a bad actor, to be quite frank. I think he actually does pretty well. Have him be the Goldberg role because Goldberg's not a very good actor. And that being said, Santa's sleigh aside, which Goldberg does give a fantastic performance in as an evil Jewish demonic Santa Claus who kills people. That's another one you should cover maybe. Anyway, on TV at the time in WCW, you do have Diamond Dallas Page and you do have Booker T, but he's also barely in the movie at all. Goldberg, I think, was out on the shelf injured at the time. He was also going through a weird heel turn, which was like the first time he was ever a bad guy. So they got everything backwards. On TV, what you're actually getting is like super already kind of old and very injured Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. The NWO is done at this point, so Hulk Hogan's back to being a good guy, even though it's 1999/2000. Jeff Jarrett is like the world champion around this time as well, which doesn't really end up working out. It's like none of the people except for DDP and then David Arquette are really even involved. Sting is just doing, I don't even know what, but he's not like really in the main title scene at this point. He's still with the company, but he's not like really doing anything. But yeah, it's interesting because the WCW we see in Ready to Rumble, the movie, was promoting their young up and coming talent way more than the actual WCW was at that time, who were still riding fucking Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Lex Luger, and even, I mean, Sting is even kind of old at that point too, but he was at least still pretty popular. So yeah, no, it was not indicative of what was actually happening in the product at the time. One thing of note, though, that I do want to point out is a very art imitating life kind of thing that happens is, so, at the outset of the movie, at the very beginning, Jimmy King gets, it's called a screw job in wrestling. It's a real thing that does happen, not very often, where he gets double crossed and, basically kicked out of the company, double crossed for real. He doesn't know what's happening. And it happens in real life. And then he's gone from the company. Famously, that happened in 1997 with Bret Hart and the WWF. What happens after this movie comes out and this movie comes out in, I believe it's May of 2000, right? in the summer of 2000, I want to say June, Bash at the Beach 2000. There's actually a Dark Side of the Ring episode about this. It's so infamous. Hulk Hogan gets like screw jobbed and fired for real by the authority figure in WCW at the time on TV, but then it's also in real life as well. So it literally almost the exact same thing without like the getting beat up part happens only like a month or two later in WCW to Hulk Hogan in real life. So this all predicted what was going to happen. The one difference is that it was on a pay-per-view. People had to pay to see this. Vince Russo, again, the head of creative at the time, comes out and he's like, fuck Hulk Hogan. You'll never see that. He's from Brooklyn and he has a super thick accent. He'd be like, fuck Hulk Hogan. You're never going to see that stupid piece of shit ever again in a WCW ring. That motherfucker will never be here again. And there's a whole Dark Side of the Ring, which is a fantastic docuseries that covers this, where that was completely unscripted. Hulk Hogan didn't know Vince Russo was going to do any of that, and he immediately stormed out, quit / got fired on air, but also quit, I guess, and then was involved in a lawsuit against WCW and Vince Russo for the rest of until WCW went out of business less than a year later. Even more just incredible trivia about this movie.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Fucking wild.
Yeah.
I mean, if that is true, you know, like if that happened based on the movie, then my biggest priority would be finding the real life Sal Bandini. Because
yes, I was just going to say Sal Bandini. Want to wrestle?
Does he have the same charisma as Sal Bandini in this movie? Because that guy is, we were talking about the slapstick
as Martin
working.
Landau. Yeah.
My God. He's so
incredible.
Fun.
That entire character is 100% based on Stu Hart and his infamous dungeon. Stu Hart is the father of Bret Hart and Owen Hart and a number of other less successful wrestling children. There were actually like 9 or 10 kids. There's a lot of them. But Stu Hart was a wrestler in his day and a promoter. He had his own promotion called Stampede Wrestling based out of Calgary. And he had his a wrestling school that was called the Hart Dungeon. And it was called that, you know, because it was in this sweaty basement in their house, but also because it was like he would like torture his students the way that Sal Bandini does in the movie, you know, because he came from the old school way of thinking as a wrestler where you have to be a shooter. You have to actually know what you're doing in order for it to be believable when you're pretending to do it. So you have to kind of learn how to do it first. And also it's the old school mentality of like weeding out the ones who aren't tough enough and blah, blah, blah. It's, you know, it's toxic, whatever. But that's the way it was. And, you know, all of the Harts, Bret and Owen came out of that. So did a number of other guys like Chris Benoit, whatever. And I think dude. Sure. And,
rest in power, Chris Benoit. Fan of the show, friend of the pod.
Man, I think Father's Day is coming up. But so that's who Sal Bandini is based on. And you know, that like the dingy little wrestling school, you know, that's the fucking putting people in holds, like hitting people in the nuts. Like if you get into a real fight, like do whatever you have to do to win if someone tries to screw you, kind of thing. So yeah, no, funny you should say it. That's who it's based on. That's the real Sal Bandini. And he's no longer with us. Rest in peace. He died like 20 years ago, but
in heaven with Chris Benoit.
That mentality of go for the strong point is so sick. It's so cool. Strategically, cool. A little suspect, but it's such a cool idea of like, it reminds me of the Steve Martin Be So Good They Can't Ignore You. Like the idea that you need to train up enough so that you can attack whatever is strongest about your opponent is so fucking cool.
Which ends up just being hitting them in the nuts, though. Sure. That's in this movie, that's all that means. So
right. A heroic move. A real face move.
You could tell the producers were like, we need another nut shot right here, because they had the blooper reel nut shot roll at the very end. In the credits, there was just like every nut shot outtake, you know, in a row. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you get disqualified in a pro wrestling match if you did that. But yeah, I guess the rules go out the window as soon as Titus Sinclair shows up.
It's keeping people on their toes.
Pissing all over the legacy of the world's heavyweight championship belt.
Well, I don't think we did any pissing on the legacy of Ready to Rumble. This movie rocks. I think we got to wrap it up.
Gave it a golden shower. I would, if nothing else, we gave it a golden shower of positivity.
Yeah. I think that's a fair way to sum it up. The only thing that I had left on this one that I wanted to say was that first scene where Arquette is daydreaming about wrestling. The clerk
so good.
is so good.
Yes.
And I feel like that was underexplored in the movie. And you could do a whole movie based on that. Like, I'm picturing like a Michael Gondry movie where you just get that kind of shit all over the place, because it was so cool the way the floor, it looked like linoleum, but the shelves were still there. So it was like, I mean, that was amazing.
I love that.
Loved it.
I love that. Honestly, probably the best scene in the entire movie.
Yes.
Honestly, all the wrestling scenes in this movie were the best scenes because you have actual pro wrestlers doing them. They all look very good. The more unmasked Rey Mysterio you can get in there, the better, which is always weird to see his little baby face on an adult man's body. But that scene in the beginning where they have the ring ropes like in the convenience store and like all the stuff falling off the shelves and everything. Like, yeah, no, you're totally right. I wish they did way more fantasy sequences and stuff like that. Then it would actually make sense if the base story was more grounded in reality. Then you could have the crazy over the top cartoonish shit in like a fantasy sequence. Then it would totally, it already is a perfect film. But if I were to critique it at all,
it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I 100%
anything.
agree.
But incredible, dude. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
What do you have coming up? I know the improv show last weekend was a fucking blowout. That was insane. People were like lined up.
It was a blast.
Nuts.
Yeah, it was
so
great.
Good.
I can't believe Dwayne Johnson himself showed up.
That was a cool cameo.
He was looking for Madison Square Garden. I had to point him in the right direction, but it was still really great to see him. He's an old friend. But I do have a different kind of comedy show coming up, one that's planned ahead of time. It's known as sketch comedy. And it's October 2nd. I'm doing a sketch comedy show created by Alyssa Lechner, and it's going to be at Caveat, which is in the Lower East Side of Manhattan at 9:30 p.m. So yeah, if you're around there on October 2nd, 9:30, come check it out.
Incredible.
Hell yeah.
Dude, thanks again for doing this. This is great.
Thanks
I'm
for
so
having
glad
me.
that you brought this movie into my
thanks,
life.
Man.
I hope there was a lot of I hope we learned a lot today.
I did. I learned a lot.
Thank you guys, though. This was a lot of fun.
Dude, anytime.
Yeah,
Listener,
thanks, man. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you, too. What did you think about Ready to Rumble? Let us know. Send us an email, nerdy430@gmail.com. We'll read it on the show. We're going to be back here again next week. I think next week is finally Blade. I've erroneously said several times that it's Blade. I think it actually is next week. So watch it. We'll see you back here then. Until then, stay nerdy, everybody. Bye.
Stay nerdy. Bye.
Too sweet.
Thanks, Nick.
Too sweet.
Too sweet.